All right, so today there's a couple things I want to accomplish. We've gotten through the text of Revelation, and so basically we have completed that part of the course, and so focus today is just kind of pull some things together as well as think about preparing for the final. Remember, the final is 1 week from today in this room at 12:50. It's 12:50 to 1:40, so you'll have almost 2 hours to complete the final. Probably won't need all that time, but you will have that. Between now and the final, I'll certainly be available to meet. I'll be on campus. You can email me, whatever works most conveniently for you. And so I want to kind of take some time, bring some things together, and then talk a little bit about the final. Won't really say too much. The final, very similar format to what we've done before, so there really isn't that much different. I want to start off by thinking and talking about some things as we kind of finish up Revelation, trying to pull some things together. Obviously, we went through section by section, and so sometimes it's a little difficult to keep all of that together, the overarching continuity in the book. And so I want us to kind of spend some time discussing a little bit and thinking about some things related to the book. Where we started off back in the beginning of the semester, all those weeks ago, we talked about how a lot of people approach Revelation with trepidation, almost a fear, great concern, unclear, a lack of clarity over the book. And so, just kind of get thinking about some things today. Now that we're done, now that we've spent 14 weeks going through Revelation, have your feelings towards Revelation changed? Do you feel more comfortable with the book? Do you still find it a confusing book? How have you, if you have changed, how have you changed over the past 15 weeks?
I feel a little more comfortable with it only because I'm able to observe the context a little more so than in the past.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. With it being a book that isn't often studied, they can really actually taking time to go through it can help. Other comments, thoughts?
Whenever I've studied this book before, it was always from my home congregation, so I kind of just had their thoughts. I think I don't even know what we are whenever we talk about this. But I've never been presented with all four of the different ideas for the book. So that's something that has opened my eyes to all these possibilities for what Revelation could mean. And then also, I feel like the people who were trying to teach me didn't fully understand the book, or at least not as well as I was taught in this class. Because they would never talk about old prophecies and how that kind of relates to the book of John and kind of related to Revelation and just whatever. So I'm definitely a lot more comfortable with it. I'm still really confused because there are some things that there just aren't definite answers for.
Right.
But I'm at least a little bit more comfortable.
Other comments, thoughts?
Well, this was my first Revelation study, and then I didn't get as blessed as my first Revelation.
Anybody feel confident that if they were called upon to teach Revelation, they would feel like, oh, I can, you got to do a Bible class, and we need somebody to do a Bible class to the kindergartners on Revelation. Download it. Yeah, YouTube.com. Well, hopefully, hopefully that there's been some information here that if you're ever called upon to at least participate in a class on Revelation, you'll have something to contribute, even though you might not feel comfortable teaching it to someone. One of the things, this is I've taught Revelation quite a bit in church settings for a variety of groups. Had sat in some Revelation classes before that. This is the first time actually kind of teaching it in a university setting, and so I kind of had to expand, and go in more depth, because of the amount of time we have to go through it, and really kind of help you all with the book as well. And it's one of those things where each time I've studied it, I've learned more and more from it in a variety of perspectives. Looking at the four that we've been looking at, and pulling some things together. And so, I wouldn't say necessarily my feelings have changed, but I've once again had a great appreciation for this book. That even though there are still parts to me that are confusing, even having taught it quite a bit. And it's one of those things where if you end up teaching Revelation once, you often find yourself having to teach Revelation quite a bit. Right? It's one of those things where I will be asked to, we need somebody to teach. We haven't taught Revelation. Okay, I can teach Revelation, so I'll teach them in this class. Oh, we want you to teach it over in this class. Oh, we want you to teach it at high school. So watch out, right? If people find out you've studied this book, you may end up on the receiving end of a request to teach, and then you find yourselves teaching it quite a bit. My wife refuses to sit in on my Revelation classes because she's heard it so much. I know it. That's right. So, in one sense, I'm glad to hear that there's a lot of changing and filling. There's still a lot of things that are confusing for me. But looking back now to that beginning, as we kind of started off, what have you really learned? What's a big takeaway for you? That's something you learned about the book that you didn't know before. Now, several of you have said things about not knowing that much about it to begin with. But something that really was, really impressed upon your mind, or something that you really kind of are taking away from this course?
There's two things that stick out to me because I tell people I'm taking this class and how I tell them how much I really enjoy it. I knew like the 666. I'm no longer worried about that. My mind. That was something that was awesome. Also, the 7 bowls of wrath, when the last bowl was overturned, it is done, and just with God's voice, even the mountains could not be found. I mean, everything was flattened. That like gave me chills whenever I read that, because I just saw the amazing power of God. And that's something that I learned, and that really just like honed in.
Other comments, thoughts?
Well, when I came into it, I never really expected to feel comfort from reading Revelation, but just in noting like that, in the end, it's all gonna, from a future standpoint, that it's gonna work out in your favor if you're, saved. It does bring a great deal of comfort. It kind of reinforces that idea that if you're just living the right life and you're living for God, then it'll work out for the best in the end.
Yeah. Other thoughts, comments?
When I looked at Revelation before, it's usually been in the context of either we're going to take this as literally as possible or as figuratively as possible. I've seen it both ways. I think something you've done pretty well is just you present all the views and you're very balanced, and these are the pros and cons of each interpretation. And so with that, I'm able to see why other people believe what they believe, looking at the same thing I'm looking at. And also just that probably the best interpretation is finding the right balance between what's literal and in this line.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that I've become more aware of, I disagree a lot with the futurist position, but I think there's a lot of positive messages that we need to on the one side I've been wanting to emphasize we have to understand it there, but whether or not these things were fulfilled back then, there's still a lot of important things for us today, and so we've got to find that balance between understanding it for them, understanding it for us, and that it means things for both groups. Ultimately, and if it hasn't, that's great, that's fine. But do you feel like your study of Revelation on a personal level has made any sort of impact on you? And if so, what?
Just thinking about the end of time in and whether it's Revelation specifically or not, it's something that affects me personally a lot. But we're talking about like the saved and redeemed versus those who are lost and are at the fire and things. It really makes you think about what's going to happen to me, and the description of heaven and all the beauty of it, and that's part of it. You get the God and stuff like that's just something I can't wrap my mind around. But when I can get I tear up like that. So just having that glimpse into heaven is something that affects me and makes me want to do better.
Other thoughts?
I think it definitely has helped me to understand more how little we understand of some of the workings of God and His will and things like that, because I'm sure that for the Christians that were living through some of these events, they couldn't see how God tied into it and how He was working through those actions, but Revelation was kind of like the behind the scenes showing you. And even still, it's blatantly telling us this is how it's going to work out, but we still don't really understand how it works. So that's definitely something that has helped us, even though maybe I don't know exactly what's going on or how to really understand it, it's still going on in my favor. And ultimately it's going to end up well for me, even if I can't see it right now.
Yeah. Other thoughts? Comments? I think one of the biggest things for me this time through has been, and probably it's become obvious because of how often I've emphasized it, this idea of compromise and staying away from compromise. Now, compromise in a spiritual sense. There's sometimes we need to compromise with people. Right, there's issues we need to compromise on, but when it comes to our spiritual lives, as Jesus said, you can't serve God and mammon, right? You can't serve two masters, and so spiritually, this idea of spiritual compromise, obviously in some situations, so compromise isn't a total evil, but the idea is there of looking at the culture around us, which often stands against God, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. And there's so much pressure in our lives to compromise those things, those principles that God wants us to hold fast to, to hold fast to Him and Him alone. But there's a lot of pressure to kind of give our allegiance to world powers or to ideologies or things like that, and we sometimes feel we can find a way to do both. Right? I have a little bit of the world, and then I have a little bit of God, and in a lot of the cases where we saw in Revelation, the things that those Christians were being encouraged to do, you go that route, you're abandoning God. You can't have God and the world. And I don't mean to say that it's kind of like, let's all retreat from the world and all that kind of stuff. We have to be in the world, even though we're not of the world. But that idea of thinking about those Christians in those 7 churches at the beginning. And in most of them, there were Christians that were, to whatever extent, compromising. And some probably more than others. I mean, there were some that were holding fast, and that is certainly great. But, it just kind of makes me wonder, they probably didn't realize what they were doing, or really think of it in that way, right? And intentionally make those decisions of, well, I'm going to compromise this truth so I can get ahead, or I'm going to compromise this truth, but probably rationalized it, found other ways to get around some of the things. It reminds me to be careful of, are there areas in my life where I compromise? Because I have this set of values and principles that I say that I hold fast to. Right? I'm a Christian. I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. But are there some areas in my life where I've started to compromise, like those Christians did? And so if Jesus was writing a letter to the church that I was a part of, what would he be saying, and what would be his judgment of me? And so that's been the thing that has really been on my mind this time through as I've been focused on it. And I'd like to think that I'm not compromising on that, but I'm sure that a lot of those Christians in that first century, those people that John was writing to, felt pretty much the same way.
And looking at how he did call out those that were sinning, I just think it's kind of intimidating to think that if he were writing to the congregation where we were attending and he wanted to talk to us, he would call us out in the middle of the letter to the entire church.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's we talked, of course, about the end of chapter 20 about the dead being judged and all the books are open. And I think most of you had left, and we were talking about updated Revelation. Are there like huge video screens now? Right? Instead of books, it's all kept on some sort of digital thing, and you have to watch everything that you've ever done. At the end of time, right? Certainly, as a Christian, I am very, very thankful that I have the opportunity to repent and be forgiven. But still, the idea that everything I've ever done has some sort of record. It's just kind of another one of those things where I hope, and I don't say hope in the sense of wish, but trusting in God and trusting in Christ, that my name is there in the book of life. I have that hope. I'm trying to live that way, live repentant when I realize it. But yeah, the idea of being called out, having everything on display, even some of the things that we think nobody would ever know, that can be a kind of a scary thought. Yeah. So let's talk here. I want to kind of pull some things together, some larger messages or themes from Revelation, and then move into talking about some stuff for the final. So I have a couple that I picked out, 4, though there's certainly more, but I'd like to hear some from you. What do you think would be a message that we can take away from the book of Revelation? We've touched on some of them already, but what do you think? Looking back on the entire book of Revelation. That can be a message for them, message for us, message for all time, whatever you want to go with.
Be careful who you do business with.
Be careful who you do business with.
I guess it's not supposed to be guilty by association. You mess with the Father,
Yeah, when you look at, you have the prostitute there and the judgment of that, but then, the people that were involved with her were also found guilty before God. And a lot of that having to do specifically with business, but, we can use business in a very broad way. But yeah, that's a good point, Paul says, bad company corrupts good morals. Right? We might think, I can handle it, right? And whatever they are, I'm me, but you get involved in those types of relationships, it can certainly change you more than perhaps you realize. What else? What other themes or messages can we think of? Yeah, don't compromise. You won't be surprised after I just talk there that it's going to be one of the ones here that I'm going to talk about in a minute. Yeah, that I definitely think is an important one. And it's very, very much connected with be careful who you do business with, right? Because often in those kind of relationships, in business or in emotional relationships, we can often find ourselves compromising because of the benefits, or I really like this person and I really want them to like me, or the compromise can be a real thing in relationships as well. Now certainly there's some compromise that needs to take place in relationships, but we have to be careful what kind of compromise that is.
Being faithful to God and not being misled by things of the world or different expectations and not being whatever.
Yes, being faithful to God and being aware of other messages in the world, other teachings in the world. I mean, we live in a world where we have access to all sorts of messages in all sorts of formats. And so, there's a real danger sometimes that if we aren't mindful of how we handle information we receive, whether that's through a Google search, whether that's through some things that a friend says, or we're watching somebody on TV, if we're not properly analyzing that and investigating it with the mindset of does this accord with what God teaches, then we can find ourselves in some very difficult situations. I mean, I think there's a difference between a person being mistaken about something and somebody who is intending to deceive. But in either case, the message we receive can be dangerous. All right, and so while I might disagree with someone religiously, I wouldn't necessarily name them a false teacher because they might be mistaken about something. But somebody who's intending to deceive people and intending to gain power by saying certain religious messages, well, that's more what false teachers are. But either way, the message is still false. And so we've got to be very careful that we're analyzing the things that we're receiving when it comes to teachings and messages. Other thoughts? Messages?
I don't think this is a message per se, but I just kind of see the parallels with the time that this book was written and like right now, in that the Romans wanted Christians to denounce Christ and worship the emperor or whatever, and then how that kind of parallels with like ISIS and how they're wanting Christians to denounce the Christianity or die. I just thought of that here.
Yeah, in many ways, we can't allow our situation in the West, in the United States. I mean, certainly there are anti-Christian elements in the United States, and some more active than others. But we can't forget that there are people around the world losing their lives simply because they claim Jesus as their Lord. And so we shouldn't look at that part of Revelation and say, oh, that was just something back then. No, there's a lot of places in the world today where people face that. A lot of places where they don't. And so in some places, Muslims and Christians can live together in harmony. But there are places throughout the world where people who claim Christ are dying for their faith. Taiwan.
No, I just want to take it back to what you said, and I'm a teacher, yes, to the level. There's a lot of things in Revelation that kind of like put my eyes up to some things that are going on today, even though, Revelation is not going to give you a set time and place and when the king is coming. He will, through Revelation, he let us know that, these are some signs right here. And, these things, you see this stuff, just know that, time is near. And you can, like this, he wrote the book, so. But one of the parts in there is talking about people where they wear their white to hide their shame. And said, I think that's in between 17 and 20, somewhere here. But how many people do they have white parties? Or they go to these parties and they have them all white. And a lot of them, they say they wear white to be, to show that they're godly. When you know them women, what they talk about, speak about, sing about, rap about, in their real life is the church. So that part in Revelation actually stuck out to me to what people are doing now, as to show that, hey, we're not with you, no, you're trying to hide yourself.
Kind of different.
Sure.
Just the fact that God has power over everything. He had to grant power to maybe the devil, and everybody had to get what he was paid and not have any kind of power.
Yeah, and I've said that before, and that's a very good point to remind us of. And I've said this before, this idea of the danger is either giving too much power or responsibility to the devil, or not, either giving too much credit to him or not giving him enough. Right? And so we have to remember, he doesn't do anything except God allows it. Right? Satan has no power within himself. And these beasts had no power within themselves except what God granted them, what God allowed them to have. Yeah.
And I may be keep going down on the limb with this, but one thing that I kind of took from it, and I think I took from the N.T. Wright lecture too, he made a point that I think I kind of agree with a little bit. The message in itself was obviously meant for them versus the purpose, but we can take from it too and learn the nations, the people that do these kinds of things, ultimately this is what they're going to end up with. And I think I looking back, it seems like I can see those things time and time again. The things that the Romans were doing that it talks about were some of the very things that led to their downfall. And other nations throughout history, they picked up some of the things that Revelation talks about. The persecution of God's people, the economic oppression, and things like that. And eventually they collapsed and they fell apart. So the same thing keeps happening again, and it's kind of a warning, I think almost, if you start to do these things, this is what's going to happen ultimately. You can start to do the things.
Yeah, and while I tend to be a preterist in the sense of the fulfillment of these things, the idealist position of, these patterns throughout history, I think is, we can see that even before Revelation. And look at the Old Testament, the way God used nations to discipline his people, but he was going to take care of them too. And that this, kind of setting the stage for your own downfall by refusing to obey God, by oppressing God's people or oppressing people in general. I think there's definitely some warning there and a reminder, especially if you're in a situation where, like in ISIS or some other places where there is that oppression. Remember that God has the victory. God's going to take care of that. Maybe in your lifetime, maybe not. But they're sowing the seeds of their own downfall. Any other things anybody wants to contribute? Some of the ones that you've mentioned were ones that I had decided upon too, or ones that I pulled out. I don't think that you can go through Revelation and not get the message that God is in control. Right? If you don't get that message, you missed something. You fell asleep halfway through or something. Right? But yeah, ultimately, even when it doesn't seem like it, and Chase brought up about kind of the pulling the curtain back kind of thing, and allowing those people to see what was going on. A lot of times we go through things, whether that's just kind of the personal struggles, personal difficulties, or as a people, as a group, as a church. Sometimes it's easy to kind of say, why is God allowing this? But Revelation reminds us that God is in control. He's always in control, and He's always going to do what is right. One that we haven't specifically said, but one that several of you kind of touched on in your themes, is this idea of conquering or overcoming. That throughout the book, especially those first chapter 2 and chapter 3, that continual emphasis to the one who overcomes, the one who overcomes, the one who overcomes. And so there's the message of be one of those overcomers, and be one of those conquerors. And I think, again, that's another place where no matter what your particular interpretation of the book of Revelation, you can come away with that message, and you need to be a conqueror no matter what situation you're in, whether you're a preterist, a futurist, an idealist, a historicist. That message is just as important for us today as it was for them. We might face different situations, but that idea of overcoming how? Well, by giving your life totally to Christ, giving your faith totally to Him, no matter what the situation, whether we face something like losing our lives, or whether we face something more innocuous like the apathy that a lot of Christians are tempted to be. In our culture, we don't face as much loss of life or even loss of job. Some people are because of discrimination laws and some of those things, and so some people are facing some challenges, having to make some decisions about who they'll serve, who they won't serve, and we'll not necessarily get into that political discussion, but in general, most of us aren't going to lose our livelihood by being a Christian, and so we face more dangers like consumerism, getting caught up in a lifestyle that pushes for more money or more stuff. Doesn't mean that you're bad just because you're wealthy, but it's a temptation in our culture is to put our trust in those things and not necessarily in God. An apathy of not being that concerned about the things of God. Right? I go to church twice a week, 3 times a week. I'm at Faulkner, it's a Christian university. I make sure to go. I use all my chapel credits or whatever. But it's got to be more than that. And so we face the temptation of apathy. Not being concerned about ourselves, not being concerned about the lost, not being concerned about fellow Christians. All of that is a danger that we face because of the culture that we live in. Well, we have to overcome that. We have to be conquerors over that. And so even though it's not a stand fast, even though the government might chop off your head, it's still, we've got to fight against those kind of things that would draw us into the same kind of compromises. Right? That message is a message for all time. Right? No matter where you put this book, how you interpret it, that transcends whether this is John the Apostle or somebody else named John, whether it was late date, early date. Don't compromise. In the sense, again, as we talked about, that spiritual compromise. And then finally, and Lindsay touched on this a little bit, that new life awaits. That one of the things, even though we might not always see what God is doing, one of the things we know He's doing is getting ready to recreate human life, resurrect human life, overturn everything that went wrong through human sin. And He's waiting to overturn that. waiting to undo that. And so whether or not heaven's going to look exactly like what is described in chapter 21 and 22, we definitely await that time of renewal, of change, of eternal life, and that presence of God. Any other thoughts, comments? All right, let's talk about the final a little bit then, and some of the things to expect for the final, and especially thinking about the comprehensive part. The first part of the final is going to be very similar to Exam 1, Exam 2. There'll be some short answer questions, there'll be some multiple choice questions, and a brief essay on chapter 17 through 22. If there's any questions about that part, we can talk about them, but most of you have been doing fairly well with that. I think some of you have been doing well, and so perhaps it's just a little bit more study time needed, or making sure to discuss all the parts of the essay. So it's just like little things, I think, in that part. But in general, as a class, you've been really doing well, and so that part of the final, if you have questions or you want to talk a little bit about it, we can do that. But it's going to be very similar, and so I wasn't planning on specifically speaking to any of that here. Instead, I want to talk about that comprehensive part. That's the question. It'll show up on the exam, right? Part 4 or Part 3 or whatever it'll be. However many points, probably about 100 points. Right? So about half the final. What is Revelation about? Now, I'm not going to tell you exactly at this point what to write down. But I do want us to kind of go through and get you thinking about some things that you can say. As I said before, if you want to, write out a potential answer and send it to me, and I can look over it. Oh, you need to include this, or that's great. Obviously, you're not going to be able to bring it in and copy it, right? But that certainly would be a way to go about this.
Can we use our Bible to give examples, just like ordinary? Because I'm thinking of my answer and what I want to say, and giving specific examples and referencing those verses from it.
I kicked it around. I went a couple times with this, and ultimately I'm going to say it's not going to be open book.
Okay.
And so any examples? I'm going to go through and give you a little bit of an outline, and so you can think about some things that you would want to include. You don't have to be very, very specific. All right, and so you don't have to use a specific example or reference a specific verse, but instead use just general statements about that. So in thinking about answering this question, what do you think, right now, what would you talk about if I said, close your books, let's do the exam now? I would think, no, wake up, this guy's a nightmare.
I think I'll put Revelation is about there's several ways I could go with it, but I probably would go with Revelation is about God's mind.
Okay, and so you can kind of think about it as starting off by talking about these kind of overarching themes or messages, kind of like what we just got done with. In thinking about it, here are some things that I want you to make sure to try and focus on including. So you can talk about those kind of overarching themes. That'd be a good way to kind of get started in it. And then as you go through, what I would expect in that answer is for you to talk about the interpretations of the book. Now here too, very, very general. All right? It doesn't have to be real specific. But you should list the four, right? There are four main interpretations of the book. Give their names: preterist, futurist, idealist, historicist, with just a brief description about what each is. Right? The preterist view looks at this book as the events being largely fulfilled in the past. The futurist view looks at these books as largely awaiting a future fulfillment. The historicist view looks at this as unfolding throughout time. The idealist view looks at this as philosophical principles or cycles of events. And so just kind of a general overview of people approach the book in these four ways. But then I'd also want you to kind of come down on one of them, or maybe even a combination, but kind of describe a little bit about where you fall in it. And so here's these four interpretations. You know, one of the first exam had a question like that. Maybe you're still the same where you were back then. Maybe you've changed a little bit, modified a little bit. Any of that's fine, but just kind of give it a little bit of a discussion about where you stand on those. And so Revelation is about, well, here are the four views, but here's where I am on this. Then you would also want to talk about the purpose or purposes of the book. You may think there's one purpose for the book. Maybe you think there's like two or three. So what would be a purpose of the book of Revelation? What's it intended to do?
I think the first part of Revelation is basically encouraging and correcting southern churches.
All right, so that would be something you run. So you talk about the four different views, and then say the purpose of the book of Revelation is to, correct and encourage the seven churches of Asia. Or you could make it broad, right? You wouldn't have to. What might be another way you could phrase the purpose?
To intensify the necessity and importance of being baptized for your salvation and what you get for making that decision and continuing to follow through and remain faithful. Else, the consequences are as follows.
That's really one complex sentence. It'd probably end up as a run-on. But that would be a
couple semicolons.
Yeah, so you throw some semicolons in there, I'm good. And then, so you could be very specific, or you could kind of just, comfort persecuted Christians, right? So there's a couple ways you could go. Both of those, would be, I think, would be good examples. Tom?
And I just want to say, stated course. Regardless of what field is being open, or if you're around those things, opening what those fields do, just stay with God. Keep him in your heart, keep close to God. When he said, you can find whatever.
Right, so in answering what Revelation is about, you want to talk about the interpretation and where you find yourself. You want to talk about the purpose. Again, it could be very, very general. It could be very, very specific. Then you might also want to think about some sort of comment about the audience or the audiences. That it's written to seven churches in Asia, but Christians throughout time have approached this book. So you want to have something to say there about the audience. If at any point here, I don't clarify, if I'm not clear about what kind of things to think about including, let me know, and I'll try to clarify that. And so some general background introduction over the entirety of the book. And then what you want to do from that point on is to begin starting a survey of the narrative. Now, survey, that means it's general. That means it's brief. I don't want to see, even if you could possibly do it, right? Quoting exactly, right? And getting down to the very minute details. But a survey. And so in thinking about that first section, the letters to the seven churches, I wouldn't expect you, and you don't need to talk about it Right? In the letter to Ephesus, Jesus says you've left your first love. In the letter to Smyrna, he commends them because they're small, they're poor, but they're really rich. In the letter to Pergamum, and going on. Right? But some general principles, messages, lessons from that section. And what are some of the things that comes out in that section on the letters to the 7 churches? If you can list all 7, that's great. If you can't, that's fine. Right? I expect probably there will be somebody who will write, okay, you'll be writing, and then John writes letters to 7 churches, to Ephesus, to Smyrna, to Pergamum, to Thyatira, to Sardis, to Philadelphia, to some other one. And then move on, right? You'll get, I got 6 of them. Why can't I think of this one? So don't be overwhelmed by trying to remember the 7 churches, all right? I mean, if you got it, great. If you don't, that's fine. But don't get caught up on that where you find yourself, I can't write anything now until I got all 7 of them listed. But yeah, just general, what are some general messages, if you were summarizing that section, put that section in a sentence or 2. Right? What's it all about? That's kind of what I'm thinking. That's kind of what I want, is that each of these sections, just a sentence or 2 that describes what's going on in that particular section. And so when you get to the throne room scene, right, certainly I want you to talk about, John seeing God on his throne. And you could, if you want, talk about the 4 living creatures, the 24 elders, and talk about one living creature had a headlight, but again, that's not necessary. Instead, just talk about, he sees the throne room, and it's filled with all sorts of jewels and angelic beings, and there's a lot of praise, and those kind of things, instead of, again, if you can talk about the specifics, that's great, but, you're not going to be writing 3 hours here. You don't have that kind of time. So survey, right, in a sentence or 2, chapters 4 and 5. And so you talk about, what goes on in chapters 4 and 5. Same kind of thing with the 7 seals. Take them as a whole. What's the general summary of the 7 seals? Right? So you don't have to say, right, the first seal was broken, and it was a rider on a white horse, and he was given a crown, and he carried a bow, and the second one, it was the red horse, and he was given a sword, and the third one was a black horse, and he was getting a bit. Right? Just general. Right? What are some of the things that we can talk about? That in the opening of the seals, God is revealing that punishment was going to come through warfare, through famine, through environmental disasters. Right. Something, again, very similar summary. With the 7 trumpets, same kind of thing. But here, one of the things to specifically think of mentioning, and this will be important as well for the 7 bowls, is that it's increased. Right? So you want to suggest there of how when the 7 trumpets are sounded, the punishments are at a higher level. Right? And so no matter what else you summarize there, emphasizing that it's increased. Right? It doesn't. I'm not looking for you to say in the seals it was 1/4, in the trumpets it's 1/3. Right? You don't have to say that, but just to emphasize the increase that's taking place in God's punishment against Babylon. You might need a little bit more than 1 or 2 sentences to talk about the woman, the dragon, and the 2 beasts. But here again, summary, right? Brief overview, a sentence on each of these. Here too, not looking for you to say, it was a woman clothed with the sun, and she had a crown of stars, and the moon was under her feet, and and she was pregnant, and she was going to give birth to a male child who was going to rule the nations with a rod of iron, and right. But just general kind of overviews of, and so after the destruction of the 7th trumpet, John sees a series of visions. One is of a woman pregnant and about ready to give birth. One is of a dragon who has set himself against the woman and her children, and then 2 beasts that the dragon brings up to serve with him. One a worldwide power and one a false prophet. Right? That's basically what I'm looking for. Right? Just kind of a brief overview of these sections. Questions so far? Anything to clarify at this point?
Maybe you'll put this on Blackboard.
It's going to be available. You can go through under Blackboard Collaborate, and so you can watch this back. Or it'll be on YouTube. I'll be posting the slides on YouTube, so you can go back if you need to. Alrighty. With the 7 bowls, once again, not a extensive. I mean, even in the description of the 7 bowls, it's very rapid fire. But within that, just what's going on, what's taking place, right? God's judgment is finally being totally revealed. That it's an increase of what had taken place before. With this next section, talking about the prostitute, you could talk about the description of the prostitute, or you can instead just talk about what the prostitute represents. Right? And so talking about this idea of Babylon and the impact that Babylon has on not only the saints, but the rest of the inhabitants of the earth. And the judgment that Babylon faces because of that, right? As you think it's going into chapters 18, first part of 19, you wouldn't necessarily have to, now we're getting into parts that you'll be tested on in the first part of the final, right? And so in the first part of the final, you might be asked questions about, what are the 3 groups that wail over Babylon's destruction? Well, you wouldn't necessarily have to talk about the kings of the earth, the merchants, and the sailors in your comprehensive essay, but you should make the comment about that the downfall of Babylon is going to have a profound effect on a variety of groups of people because of how the inhabitants of the earth were involved with it. And so we're into chapter 18, chapter 19. Certainly saying something about the rider on the white horse. Here too, you don't have to go through and learn all the, you probably will learn some of those things because there will be questions, like multiple choice questions or a short answer question. But you wouldn't necessarily have to write down everything, right? Robe dipped in blood, all that kind of stuff. You wouldn't necessarily need to do that in a comprehensive essay. But you do want to kind of talk about Jesus coming in judgment, putting an end to Babylon. Now, in getting to the 1,000-year binding of Satan, the 1,000-year reign, it would probably be good, just like at the beginning, you talk about the 3 main options, premillennial, postmillennial, amillennial, for interpreting this passage. But you should be in good shape for that because you need to know that for the first part of the final. Right? And so that is not something you probably have to. So these last couple sections, if you're ready for the first part of the final, you'll be okay for this part of the final, the comprehensive part. With the Great White Throne Judgment, you would probably want to emphasize the lake of fire. Right? The dead appearing before God. Those are the kind of things there. You wouldn't necessarily have to contrast the book of life with the books that are open, but just by saying the dead will be judged, or the dead are judged, and those whose names are not in the book of life are tossed into the lake of fire. And then finally, a discussion of New Jerusalem, not the specifics, but the general overview of what does that part of Revelation talk about? What's it talking about? Right? The coming new creation, the reward for the righteous. And then, if you have the time, because that shouldn't take you long at all, talk about all that stuff. Just a concluding paragraph that kind of ties it all together. In thinking about length, I know that's usually something, how long does it need to be? And my response is usually long enough. Right? If you're covering those points, you're in good shape. And like I said, if it's just a sentence or two on each of those sections, right, as long as you're kind of, like the premillennial view, postmillennial view, just a brief little description. You don't have to go on and on and on about it. You don't even have to go on about pros and cons of it, but just kind of an overview. You don't have to go about, well, here's the positives of the premillennial view, the negatives of the premillennial view, the positives of the postmillennial view. Right? You don't have to do that, but just a brief. What does the premillennial view means that the second coming is going to happen before the millennial reign. The postmillennial view is that the second coming will happen after the millennium, and the amillennial view is that this is totally symbolic. It doesn't represent a reign of Christ on 1,000 years on earth. So again, just brief kind of overviews. As I said before, if you want to submit a possible answer to me, I am more than willing to kind of look over it and say you're on the right track. Here are some things to include, or here's some things you don't have to worry about. You don't have to be this detailed, or you don't have to include that element. And so if that's going to be of help to you, if you just want to come by and talk about it, or just send me, like, here are the bullet points. Now, hopefully they're different bullet points, because I'd say, yeah, that looks great. Have you talked about that stuff? You're fine. But if you just want to run some stuff by me, let me know what I can do to help you in preparing for this, because it's a lot of material to kind of remember, but it's then also difficult to try and, all right, what do I need to include? What do I need to not include? Since you've learned so much over this semester.
Can our submission be our fifth essay? Because that's basically what I got from the fifth essay.
There's a very similar overtone between the fifth essay and this, and so that might be a good route to go about it. Because I think you could do this in 500 words, and I think 500 words would, yeah. He's like, I can write 3 pages on it. But yeah, I mean that's certainly and if you want to leave me a comment or something, or if you submit it electronically, if you submit it by email to me and just say, I'm thinking about including this pretty much for the comprehensive, that way it clues me in to say, okay, I need to pay attention to that. I'd be willing to do that as well.
With our previous test and out-of-class assignment essays, a lot of times you ask for our opinion on certain things. This one seems to be a lot more factual and just here's how it is. Are you wanting our opinion at any point?
I'm wanting your opinion in the part about the interpretation. Right? And so you list the 4 and then kind of say this is where I'm at, whether it's a specific one or a combination of some. And then you can, if you want to, when you're talking about the 1,000-year reign, if you favor a particular one or not, that's fine. And then in the conclusion, if you want to inject more of your personal thoughts. Yeah, but probably a lot of it is just going to be a general overview of the content. Anything else?
The test optional.
The test is not. Well, I guess in a sense it is, but if you'd like to do well in this class, the test is not optional. Yes, I did send an email out yesterday about the course evaluations. If I get 85% response on the course evaluations, everybody that has completed it will get 15 points on their final grade. Well, since it's a total of points, right, you get out of 1,000 points, and so it wouldn't be just included as 15 more points. Not 15 percentage points. All right, it's 15 points. All right, they are valuable to me, but they are not that valuable to me. That might look. Everybody got a name in this class. Well, they filled out evaluations. Plus, I don't get to see them, so I don't know if you're saying great things about me or not. But yeah, I don't get to see them until after grades are submitted. So please be honest. Please be if there's something you really liked about this course or the format, let me know. If there's something you didn't think worked, let me know. I do spend the time looking at them and thinking about how I can better as a teacher and how I can present the courses a little bit better as well. And so if at least 85% of you fill that out, everyone that filled it out will get 15 points on their final grade. What other questions? All right, we'll go ahead and end there. And as I mentioned, I will be around, and I'm certainly available by email if any questions come up between now and the final.